So there's a lot of talk out there about how adding some horizontal force to your golf swing could really help you. But there's also a lot of people who look at horizontal force and look at sway and start thinking that these are good things that we want to add in our golf swing. However, many golfers have a difficult time controlling low point once they start adding in a few more sways. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the differences between creating an effective pressure shift and using our horizontal force correctly versus trying to use our horizontal force to create a pressure shift, which typically doesn't work out the best for most golfers. So when we look at golf swings, there's a lot of talk about creating some horizontal force. And I believe the reason so many people talk about horizontal force is because so many people have a tough time hitting behind the golf ball, meaning that they're hitting the ground prior to hitting the ball. So if you're one of those people, you're going to want to pay attention because what's going on typically is a little misleading. And what we're going to try to do is separate the difference between a pressure shift and using horizontal force. So before we talk about the pressure shift, first we're going to talk about the horizontal force and when we're using this horizontal force. So if we kind of think about it in a very simplistic way, when we use horizontal force, we're simply trying to move the body towards and away from the target. We're not talking about moving it towards and away from the golf ball, and we're not talking about twisting. We're just simply talking about the towards and away, pushing of the mass towards and away from the target. So when we talk about this, when we start the golf swing back, we're going to see that there's some kind of negative horizontal force because obviously we're moving the club back. And then hopefully somewhere around here, what we're going to see is that there's a horizontal push back towards the target because once again, we don't want to drift off and we don't want to create too much sway. So we're hoping that by about P2, we're seeing that there's a horizontal push back towards the target. And when you know it, as we're coming down in our golf swing, because we have to unbend the shaft, there's going to be some horizontal force that way, okay, to stop me from falling over on my left side. So this horizontal force is happening throughout the golf swing. But where I think a lot of people are really struggling with it is they're using the horizontal force narrative to support too much sway. So what we're going to talk about next is how much sway is okay and how do I, instead of sway, create that pressure shift that we alluded to earlier. So like we talked about, how much sway is okay versus too much. And that's very confusing for a lot of people because when we talk about sway, which body part are we talking about? So we're going to keep this really, really simple because I think what we typically feel more is how we're moving across our feet more so than what we feel that we're doing in our hands. So when we're talking about sway, we're going to define sway from the middle of the pelvis. And I'm going to use some information provided by Sportsbox 3D and Dr. Phil Cheatham. And we need to recognize that when we talk about the pelvis or the golf swing moving in inches, we're talking about the middle of the pelvis in this case and how it's moving. We're not talking about the outer edge of the right hip or the middle of the right hip. We're actually talking about the middle of the pelvis. So when we talk about the middle of the pelvis and we talk about sway or translation or movement, what we're going to see is that this middle moves maybe 1.6 inches to the right. So if you want some kind of frame of reference, my pelvis is roughly 14 inches wide. So if I'm only moving at 1.6 inches roughly on average to the right, okay, that's not going to be very much. So we don't want to see this excessive kind of sliding and moving the outer edge of the right hip away from the target. That's way too much slide. And not only does that create too much slide, but now all of a sudden it gets much more difficult for me to move my upper body to the right, and my upper body tends to want to go forward. And the reason for that is because of balance, and I have to maintain that. So this would be way too much slide, and I'm not really going to be able to do much from there to create a lot of that good horizontal force like we were talking about earlier. So we're creating the slide, which kills our ability to create the horizontal force. So now that we've talked about how much slide is too much slide in the backswing, let's talk about when it matters the most, when we're hitting the ball. And that slide is very, very important because this is where golfers really tend to struggle the most, because a lot of golfers tend to still be staying behind the golf ball when they're hitting it, meaning that the pressure is staying on the right foot and their body kind of hangs back and they have a real hard time controlling low point. So what we want to talk about for them is when we talk about the center of our pelvis, once again, not our left hip, not anything like that, just the center of our pelvis. If we know that it's moving roughly 1.6 inches to the right in the backswing, well, how much does it have to move forward by the time we get to impact? Once again, with the data provided by Dr. Phil Cheatham and Sportsbox AI, we know that the average Tour Pro at impact with a driver, okay, is about roughly 4.5 inches in front of where they started, because 0 is calibrated from the starting point. So they're actually moving more to the left, but once again, they're not moving the left hip mega towards the target that way. That would be too much of that slide like we talked about. We don't want to overload the left side because once again, if I start pushing the pelvis too far forward, the upper body is not going to be able to get forward as well. It's going to want to hang back, which is going to result in my swing getting too shallow, too flat, and causing me to hit the ground too soon. So once again, seeing how too much slide affects our ability to create horizontal force is very, very important in the golf swing. So we've talked about how excessive slide really hinders our ability to create horizontal force. And we want to do a good job of taking care of our horizontal force. But to do a nice job with that, we need to make sure that we're getting that force on the correct side of the body at the right time. So we've got to make sure we're creating a nice stable pressure shift. And once again, a pressure shift is not necessarily the same thing as a horizontal force. Typically, we're using forces to translate and move the body. A pressure shift is an expression of where our weight is balanced across our feet. It's not necessarily what we're using to move the body, other than some movement in the frontal plane, because pressure is only one-dimensional, meaning that it's always going to be towards the center of gravity, 1D, very vertical, right? That's what pressure is. It's not three-dimensional. So when we're talking about pressure, we only have 100% because the 100% equals your body weight. So when we talk about pressure in this particular case, we're only talking about your pressure relative to you. So you start with 100%, you can't add, you can't destroy. You can make it go up and down through shifting it from side to side, but we're not adding and destroying pressure. We're simply moving the pressure via the weight across the feet being balanced. So here we go. If we're talking about too much slide, this is what we see a lot, right? It's going to be very, very hard to get the pressure to move because the upper body is moving the opposite of the lower body. So if you divided me in half, as my lower body goes to the right, my upper body goes left because of balance. Same thing in the opposite. So I've got to create a pressure shift, and now that I know that I'm not moving very much at all with my center, it's not moving that much at all. So now all of a sudden, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of feel like I'm letting it move a little bit, but I'm not feeling like I'm moving outside of myself. I just feel like I'm staying very much in the middle and just kind of moving back and forth. And now all of a sudden I've got a nice little pressure shift going on, because the only way to actually get my pressure to increase into my backswing like we want to see is my left leg has to decrease. So I have to add here, so I would have to lower here. Now, I don't want to lower the whole thing because now I've actually put the pressure here. But if I relax that leg a little bit and let that knee bend a little bit and move, and I feel like I'm twisting my right foot through the cuboid more into the ground, now all of a sudden we've done a nice job of creating a pressure shift without the excessive lateral motion, which is going to require a lot of horizontal force to move it around. So I think for a lot of players, horizontal force is a good thing. However, we've got to balance that horizontal force, and we've got to create that horizontal force at the right time so that we're able to manage low point, because that's obviously one of the important things we have to handle in the golf swing, is making sure we're getting the ball and then the ground, not the ground and then the ball. So we hope that this clears up the difference between horizontal force and a pressure shift. So thanks so much for watching. We understand that we're talking about pressures and forces which are invisible to the naked eye, so I apologize if I've done a poor job demonstrating while explaining this. If you have any questions about what you've seen or further questions about how forces and torques work, please leave us those questions in the comment section and we'll be sure to get to them as soon as we can. If you have any questions about working with us or getting to know more about what we do here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, please find us on our website at measuredgolf.com. So thanks so much, and until next time, keep grinding.